Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, because it's the week leading up to Halloween week, we are going to start tackling some of the scary stuff in Minecraft, and we're going to start by going to the Nether and looking for some Wither skeletons to fight, because in this episode I want to fight the Wither, an optional boss that players can summon. Unlike the Ender Dragon, which guards an entire dimension, the Wither is something you voluntarily step into as a fight, and you can fight in basically any dimension you choose. We're probably not going to be fighting the Wither here in the Nether, but it's sort of unofficially the boss of the Nether, because all of the resources required to create what you need to summon the Wither are required here in the Nether. And some of it is fairly common. We need 4 soul sand to construct the sort of summoning totem that builds the Wither, so that's going to be nice and easy to get hold of. The other things, though, are notoriously difficult to get hold of, because we will need 3 Wither skeleton skulls. Of course, at this point, you will probably know Wither skeletons as the tall, black skeletal mobs that you will find in Nether Fortresses, and so that's why we're going to return to a Nether Fortress to see if we can seek them out. However, the first Nether Fortress that we ever encountered, the one that is up here, is not going to be the best for fighting Wither skeletons, and I will explain why as we take a look around, because you can probably see from this quick look at a couple of corridors that this Nether Fortress is surprisingly empty. Nether Fortresses are meant to be challenging structures with a variety of mobs spawning, and indeed as you're exploring one of these you may find a few mobs spawning in the corridors. If you step too close to a blaze spawner, you'll probably find yourself encountering a lot of blazes. But why exactly is this Nether Fortress not giving me anything to fight right now? That comes down to the location, really. We are standing in the middle of a crimson biome that is very close to a Nether Wastes, and a lot of zombified piglins and other mobs will have spawned in the vicinity. They take up the mob cap, which we explained a little bit in the episode about our hostile mob spawner. They technically count as hostile mobs, even though they are largely neutral to the player, and a lot of those spawned in the local area will actually prevent too many mobs from spawning inside the structure of the Nether Fortress. Up there, though, on the balcony, we can see a couple of the mobs we are looking for. There are a couple of Wither skeletons, currently kind of passive looking because I'm not close enough to them. But up here, you can already see a couple of defenses I have made against Wither skeletons when we explored this fortress before. We have a couple of bars at the 3-block height built out of solid blocks to prevent the Wither skeletons from walking underneath it, since they are 3 blocks tall. But as you can see, we've just explored a decent chunk of this fortress, and we only have a couple of Wither skeletons that we've even seen spawning around here. So we need to make a couple of changes to that where possible in order to maximize the amount of Wither skeleton spawns we are going to see and get a higher chance at acquiring Wither skeleton skulls. Wither skeletons are unlike other mobs in that they will drop their heads simply as a loot drop from killing them, whereas other mobs you have to go through a slightly more complicated process in order to get hold of any mob heads. It's also worth noting, since there are a couple of popular mob head data packs out there, that we're talking strictly about acquiring the heads of vanilla mobs, which you can only get from creepers, zombies, skeletons, Wither skeletons. You get the head of the Ender Dragon from raiding End City ships, and it's possible now to get piglin heads as of a more recent update. Of those 6 that you can acquire in the vanilla game without any data packs or mods included, Wither skeletons are the only ones that drop if you just kill the mob with a sword. But since the drop rate on those is incredibly low, they are a very rare drop, we need to make sure we have a sword with looting, and we need to find an environment where more Wither skeletons are going to spawn. Fortunately for us, we know where one of those is. A while ago we created this portal out to the desert biome, and we found this Nether Fortress, which, if you take a look at it from the air, is kind of unique for a couple of ways. First of all, it is entirely encompassed inside the biome of a soul sand valley. And soul sand valleys are really good places for Nether Fortresses to spawn if you want a lot of mobs to appear, because the mob cap in these areas is reduced. The only mobs that can spawn here are skeletons and ghasts. You won't find zombie piglins or regular piglins wandering around these biomes unless they have wandered in from a nearby biome of a different type. And because skeletons and ghasts are ranged mobs and might be slightly difficult to deal with, the game limits the amount of them that can spawn here while keeping the global hostile mob cap fixed at the same amount it was before, which means ultimately if you find a Nether Fortress entirely inside a soul sand valley, you are likely to get a lot of spawns from Nether Fortress mobs, and very few others. Which is why, whenever we come to this Nether Fortress, we get ambushed by a ton of blazes immediately, because, as you can see, there are a ton of Nether Fortress mobs spawning on these parapets, and that includes blazes, magma cubes, zombie piglins, and wither skeletons. You'll also find a couple of regular skeletons spawning inside the fortress from time to time as well, but already we are seeing twice as many wither skeletons just standing up here as we saw in the entirety of that previous fortress in the Crimson biome and the Nether Wastes, and that is why we have come here to hunt for wither skeleton skulls. Naturally though, I'm approaching this with a little bit of trepidation, because there are a lot of blazes around, there's a lot of very hostile environments for the player here, and of course the wither skeletons themselves are going to be actively pursuing us and trying to kill us. Of course, here in this fortress, we can employ the same tactics we did in the last one. We can hide underneath these 3-block high bars, create a few more of those around the fortress, and that should make it more difficult for the wither skeletons to pursue us. It will definitely make a lot of sense if we can make some of those out of nether bricks, or at least blocks from the nether environment, because all I've got on me to build with is wood right now, and wood is clearly going to be set on fire by any of the blazes that spawn in this area. We also need to take care of any ghasts that spawn in the environment, since they're going to provide a bit of danger from above, but obviously avoiding the fireballs that are coming at us in basically all directions from blazes, we can lure some wither skeletons back to intersections like this one. And frankly, with the amount of blazes that have spawned in this fortress, I'm tempted to bring a fire resistance potion with me. That way, the only time we need to worry about blazes is when we're dealing with them at melee range up close. So having grabbed a couple of fire resistance potions from my storage, it's time to head back into the fortress and face down some wither skeletons. And I can already see a pack of 4 of them generating over here by this tunnel, and there's a couple more over this side as well. So, you know what, I'm going to build another barrier right here so that we can lure these 2 skeletons in, and we're going to see if either of those drops a wither skeleton skull for us. The rest of the time, though, they will drop coal and bones, both of which are going to be very useful in the average survival player's day. They'll also drop some comparatively useless stone swords, so those we're simply going to chuck out of our inventory. And there we go, on probably our 7th or 8th wither skeleton kill of this little batch of the fortress, we have finally acquired our first wither skeleton skull, and we get the spooky scary skeleton advancement for that. We've already acquired one mob head in the form of the dragon's head, but of course this mob head is a brand new one, and we can wear it on our head like a helmet, where it confers basically no defensive capabilities and isn't all that useful. So we're going to take that off in favor of the diamond helmet, which will be much more protective for us. And while obviously that's a huge victory getting our first wither skeleton skull, we need to get hold of 3 of these in order to summon the wither. So I'm going to patrol this fortress, gather up a few more wither skeleton skulls, and we'll see how many we can take home at the end of these fire resistance potions. This fortress seems to be pretty long though, and so simply running from one end of this fortress to the other is going to be enough to despawn any hostile mobs on one end and spawn some more at the other. That is our second wither skeleton skull, and the last thing I want right now is for that ghast fireball to destroy the skull. So let's run away from the ghast, try and return fire when we can, and keep hunting down these wither skeletons. Eventually, it's going to be possible to turn this fortress into a wither skeleton farm, where we can optimize the conditions for wither skeletons and only wither skeletons to spawn. And that's not only going to allow us to farm wither skeleton skulls for repeated encounters with the wither, it's also going to be a great way of farming coal and bones if we want to get hold of either of those in large quantities. The other absolutely wild thing about this fortress, which we mentioned last time we were here, but we might as well mention this again, is that it has no interior. Basically, any interior structures that would generate would appear after this room with the lava well, and there'd be a staircase here leading down into the structure of the fortress, but it simply stops here, cut off by the walkways of the exterior of the fortress. And so that means if we want to turn this into a wither skeleton farm later on, we are left with a bunch of area which is pretty easy to transform into a fortress farm. So that's actually kind of perfect. One other worthwhile thing to note about this fortress when I'm not on fire is that it has 2 blaze spawners, and I'm going to pillar up a little bit here to see if we can activate both of them from a point equidistant between the 2. Obviously that one over there is currently not active, and this one is not, I think because we are slightly too high up. Yeah, it seems like if we get this far away from this spawner, it doesn't look like we have enough range to get close enough to the other spawner for them both to be active at once, which is a bit of a shame because a double blaze spawner is not only an effective source of blaze rods, it's also a really solid XP farm. We'll be looking into much more effective XP farms in the future of the series, but for the moment it might not be a bad option. If you've got hold of some elytra and you're finding that the wither skeleton spawns in the fortress are dwindling somewhat, it's probably just down to the fact that a bunch of other mobs have spawned in other locations. So what you can do is simply fly at least 128 blocks away from your nether fortress. That's going to make sure that everything in that area despawns. And as you can see, the surrounding area immediately fills up with a ton of zombified piglins, which are going to spawn out here naturally in this Nether Wastes biome. Then we just got to fly directly back towards the fortress, and we should find that much like when we first visited, a ton of those mobs are going to spawn in. We got a cluster of wither skeletons over here that we can lure back towards our nearest safety bar, where of course a bunch of blazes are waiting for me, but that's fine because I've got a fire resistance potion active. And back over here, these wither skeletons are patiently waiting to be sliced, and hopefully one of these should give us the last wither skeleton skull we need. Nope, looks like they didn't. Okay, well there's another cluster waiting for us at the crossroads. Let's approach them. Well, there we go. That is Wither Skeleton Skull number 3. It's been about 20 minutes so far, and if I take a look at my statistics real fast, we can scroll down to the bottom here where it will tell you I've killed 91 Wither Skeletons. Obviously, we've killed a few before this episode, but naturally, that has taken about 90 Wither Skeletons to get hold of 3 Wither Skeleton Skulls. So, from that, we can conclude it's about a 1 in 30 chance of getting a Wither Skeleton Skull with our current level of looting on this sword. One other quick thing to note is that Smite works on Wither Skeletons since they are undead mobs, so if you want to kill them a little faster, having Smite on a sword or an axe is going to make a little more sense, although the sword is going to make more sense if you're trying to acquire Wither Skeleton Skulls, since that will be the only type of tool that you can add the looting enchantments to. And if you're fighting a group of them like this and one of them drops a Wither Skeleton Skull, there is a chance that another one can pick it up and start wearing it, at which point they will still drop it if you end up killing them as well. But if you see a skull drop on the ground and then disappear, that's usually why. It's because another one of the Wither Skeletons nearby has picked it up and put it on their head. Since I've still got another fire resistance potion active, we're going to run out the clock on that. I've got about 5 minutes of it left. We're going to see if we can acquire any more Wither Skeleton Skulls for our future collection, because we'll definitely want to fight the Wither more than once. But with all of these blazes around, I would rather not be in the Nether Fortress without fire resistance right now, so once that's run out, we're going to skedaddle back to the overworld, and we can make our preparations for fighting the Wither. A little while later, back in the overworld, of course, it is raining, which makes a change from the fiery environment of the Nether, and I was only able to get 3 Wither Skeleton Skulls. We ran out the clock on those last couple of fire resistance potions, and we didn't get any more Wither Skeleton Skulls, but fortunately enough, 3 is all we need, and we also came away with a couple of stacks of coal, more than a couple of stacks of bones. We actually did pretty well out of that whole encounter. Not to mention also that we have a bunch of blaze rods. For the moment though, we're going to focus on the task at hand, and we need to get 4 soul sand out of this chest, conveniently just on its own there, and we're going to go and place 4 soul sand in a T shape like that with 3 Wither Skeleton Skulls over the top. We're going to put that out there in the world somewhere, and that is going to trigger the fight with the Wither. Before we do that, however, I would like to make some preparations, because the fight with the Wither can be a little bit tough depending on the circumstances in which it happens. There are definitely a few things you can do to make it easier for yourself, but it is worth preparing a little before your first encounter, especially if you haven't done the fight before. As with the Wither Skeletons, the Wither itself is affected by the Smite enchantment, and so one of the first things I'm going to recommend doing is enchanting a sword so that you end up with Smite. Looks like we'll need to go through a couple of levels before we get hold of that, especially since Bane of Arthropods or Sharpness could come up in the enchantment table. And typically Smite 4 will come up on the enchantment table. That's probably the highest level you can get from directly enchanting, but of course you can combine that with a Smite 4 book to get Smite 5, and that will be the highest level of damage you can do to the Wither with a single melee weapon. Remember, of course, that if you upgrade your sword to Netherite, that's going to deal 1 extra attack damage by default, so the default on a Netherite sword is going to be 8 attack damage. You'll notice that the Sharpness sword here says it's going to do more attack damage, but that's because Sharpness applies to anything that you attack, versus Smite, which only applies to undead mobs. And since the Wither only ever drops 1 thing, and it is a guaranteed drop, we don't need to worry about this sword having looting or anything like that. So we're just going to keep that as a Smite 4 sword, and we'll leave that for now. We'll also be able to use our bow on the Wither for the first half of the fight, so making sure that your bow has a decent power enchantment on it is probably going to be a good idea. The next way you can prepare is with potions, and potions like regeneration and strength are going to allow you to combat the Wither's degenerative effect, the wither effect that it applies, much the same as wither skeletons, and the strength 2 buff is obviously going to help you deal a lot more damage very quickly, so that's going to be essential. If you're fighting the wither on the surface, you might want to bring a potion of swiftness. If you're fighting the wither underground, you might want to bring a potion of night vision. You probably won't be fighting the wither in any environment that requires water breathing, but if you're super cautious, you might want to bring an array of potions like that. And fire resistance might also be a useful thing to have in case you encounter any lava if you're fighting the wither underground. And that really brings us to the next step. The most important, I would argue, set of preparations that you can do to fight the wither is to prepare the environment. One thing's for certain, you probably don't want to fight the wither near your base, since what the wither does to attack is fire projectiles which explode on impact and break blocks. These are very damaging to the environment around you and to anything you might have built. So unless you are very brave or don't really care about the integrity of your buildings, you probably want to make sure you are going to an uninhabited area in order to fight the wither. I would also highly recommend that you fight the wither underground somewhere, in a specialized tunnel that you have dug out or something along those lines, because the wither is capable of flight, and fighting it on the surface, its typical behavior on Java Edition will be to hover over the top of you and fire projectiles down on you, which will destroy blocks around you, digging you into a bit of a hole, and it can be difficult to navigate the terrain whilst also returning some of that firepower. So on Java Edition, I recommend going down into a tunnel to fight it where it's not going to be able to fly up into the sky and get out of range of your melee attacks. On Bedrock Edition, however, the wither is a very different fight. Instead of hovering above you, it will typically dash around and attack you from range. So the circumstances of the fight can be very different, and it will destroy blocks every time it does one of those dashes, meaning that if you fight it underground, you're likely to have a lot of debris and blocks left around, and it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to deal with the amount of entities. You'll be picking stuff up constantly, and it might even lag out the machine you're playing on if it's a lower end device, like an older iPad, like an older tablet device or something like that. For advice on how to fight the Bedrock Edition wither, I recommend going and checking out some of the very good Bedrock Edition YouTubers out there who will have fought the wither and give tutorials on how to do that. Some of them make it look like a cakewalk, even though it's a harder fight than it is on Java Edition. But since this is going to be our first fight with the wither, I actually want to show you what it's like fighting the wither on the surface, and hopefully at that point you'll get an idea why the conventional wisdom is to fight the wither underground on Java Edition. So I've come out to this remote savanna island of sorts so that we can see the devastation the wither is about to wreak on this environment. Not only that, but it extends a little bit in this direction. There is a village nearby, which hopefully shouldn't get hit too hard by this battle, and there are a few other animals around. Since the wither won't simply attack the player, it will go after anything living in the environment. So there is a chance it might be distracted by some of the passive mobs that generate around here in the savannah, and we should be able to see a couple of the other effects of the wither in action. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to open my ender chest, I'm going to open up my backup gear shulker box, and I'm going to locate my diamond chest plate, because I want to make sure I have this instead of my elytra for this fight. I'm going to keep the elytra here on my hotbar next to some fireworks, just in case I need to hot swap it in and make a quick getaway, because this fight could go south very quickly. But in the meantime, I'm going to put away any of the non-essential tools. I might bring a less enchanted shovel with me, like this efficiency shovel, just in case I need to dig myself out of a dirt hole around here. It can be kind of painful punching our way out of a hole when there is so much stuff raining down on us. And I'm going to put my pickaxes in here as well, since they are more precious to me and netherite is harder to replace. So I think I'll take one of these backup pickaxes just in case we need it. We're also going to pop in the smite sword in place of our fully enchanted sharpness sword, since we won't need the looting for this fight. So we can pop that stuff away in the ender chest. I'm going to leave the ender chest here since I can't pick it up now I don't have silk touch on me. And of course we don't need to worry about the ender chest itself being destroyed. It's unlikely that will happen, and all of our equipment is safe in there as long as we have another ender chest to retrieve it later. Now I'm going to come out here into the middle of the island, or roughly the middle, I suppose. We're going to place down a T-shape of soul sand like this, and we're also going to make sure that any other blocks around the outside of this are cleared out of grass or anything, since if anything exists within this 3x3 which is not soul sand or wither skeleton skulls, then it can prevent the wither from generating properly. We're going to put 2 of the wither skeleton skulls on each of the shoulders, like so, and when we place this third wither skeleton skull on top there, the fight will begin. It will begin with the Wither charging up like this, so we're going to have to get a little bit away from it. You'll notice its health bar slowly increases, and we're going to drink our Swiftness potion now. Once the Wither's health bar is full, it will explode like so, and the fight will begin. And now we're going to have to avoid being hit by the Wither's projectiles as we dodge through the environment. And at this point, we can end up shooting it from range with an arrow. Right now, you can see it's going to start... Oh, there we go. It's starting to fire down at us, and it's doing that thing where it hovers directly over the player and fires skulls down on you. So your best bet at this point is going to be to run away a few steps, turn around, and shoot at the Wither using your bow. You'll also notice that with each projectile it fires, it actually gains a little bit more health back, and once it gets below half health, it will get this shimmery aura around it, which will cause it to go into sword-only mode, and it won't be affected by ranged attacks anymore. So at that point, we have to strafe backwards, hit it a few times with a sword, and make sure that that Wither effect does not take us over. But it looks like we're doing pretty well. A couple more hits should bring it down. There we go. Oh my goodness, what a fight. Well, it turns out the Wither focused on us for the majority of that fight, but we ended up getting away with it. That Swiftness potion actually really helped us get away. I didn't even need to drink the Strength or the Regeneration potions or worry too much about my Elytra. My armor held throughout that fight, and it seemed like the Wither was not doing too much damage. Now, that's also to do with the fact that I am still playing in this world on normal difficulty. On hard difficulty, the Wither is going to be a little bit more damaging, and you'll notice that a couple of the projectiles it shot out were slower moving and blue, and those are the ones you need to watch out for because they will deal a little extra damage. They will destroy blocks that they can't even normally destroy, like obsidian, and they'll also inflict the Wither status effect on you, which thankfully only happened to us in the very late stages of that fight where we had to attack the Wither with a sword, melee style. But just look at the devastation that is currently all around us. There are so many blocks that have been displaced. When the Wither could not get through that tree a second ago, it simply broke the entire thing, and that's one of the behaviors the Wither exhibits, which prevents you from trapping it in a box made of obsidian or some other kind of durable material. If it can't move from an area, it will simply break through those blocks and get out. And the only thing it's not really capable of doing that to are unbreakable blocks like bedrock or end portal frames. Now I'm scouring the area to see if the Wither managed to kill any other mobs while it was attacking us, which I don't think it ended up doing. That's actually kind of a shame, unless one of the stray projectiles hit one of the passive mobs around here. And it certainly wasn't the case that there were any mobs in the immediate vicinity when we spawned the Wither and it left this enormous crater here in the center of the island. But the reason I was curious about passive mobs is that if the Wither kills anything, whether that's a player or a mob, it will leave behind a dropped Wither rose, a type of flower that we can't get except in the circumstances of the Wither fight. And Wither roses are actually a harmful flower. If you step into their hitbox, you end up taking a bit of damage and getting the Wither effect as though it has effectively poisoned you, kind of pricked you with a poisonous thorn. And while that doesn't sound like a great thing, it can also be a really useful resource, especially in mob farms. And at a certain point in the future, we're going to be gathering a bunch of those Wither roses since they can prevent other mobs from spawning except mobs which aren't affected by the Wither status effect, which means we can limit the amount of spawns in our Nether Fortress to just Wither skeletons in order to gather more Wither skeleton skulls and fight the Wither whenever we want to. And I've kind of been burying the lead here, and I apologize for that. One of the most important things about the fight is what happens when you win, because the Wither will drop this unique item called the Nether Star. And it is with this that we get to craft a beacon. If I pop the beacon crafting recipe in here, you'll see that it requires 1 Nether Star, 3 obsidian, and 5 blocks of glass. So if we return to base and craft that up, we're going to have access to a beacon. And with one last look at the devastation that we have wrought upon this small savannah island, we're going to head on home and we're going to check out the beacon. I'm also going to get back into all of my regular tools and armor. There we go. Tucked the armor away. We've got our elytra on. Perfect. Okay. So with 3 obsidian from our chest here, and there's all the obsidian that I was gathering from the obsidian pillar in the end, we should also be able to grab a few glass blocks from in here, where I've been trading some from some villagers. We'll only need 5 of those. We can turn to our crafting table and add 3 obsidian, 5 glass, and the Nether Star, and we have acquired our first beacon. Placing the beacon down in your nearby environment will honestly not do a great deal, because if you open up the beacon's interface, you'll see that it has to be placed as the top block of a pyramid shape. So we need to grab some resource blocks that we can use to power the beacon. And those are blocks of iron, gold, diamond, emerald, or netherite. Netherite is obviously the most expensive of all of these, even more expensive than diamond is. We now have enough blocks of iron from our iron farm to be able to craft a beacon base very easily. So we're going to be doing that in an upcoming episode. But for now, that is where we're going to leave this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. We have done the big scary thing. We have fought the Wither, and I reckon that's enough for today. But folks, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.